name is David.
Hi, I'm Clarence.
And today we're going to show you how to make a shepherd's pie. A lot of people know shepherd's pie to be a British classic food, and a lot of people from Great Britain would call it their ultimate comfort food. But what is a shepherd's pie, Clarence?
So basically, it's a stir fry under a layer of mash and crisped up in the oven. And usually it's consumed very, very hot.
Right, so and Clarence has illustrated that it is actually a very, very simple dish to make, and we're going to show you exactly how to do that. And throughout this video, we're going to be discussing some of the key ingredients in the shepherd's pie and their historical context that has allowed the pie to become what it is today.
So the ingredient list. We've got onions, potatoes, canned corn and peas. We're a bit cheap, we're college students. Anyways, we've got olive oil, carrots, ketchup, and the most important ingredient in a shepherd's pie was probably the Worcestershire sauce. Of course, the lamb mince, garlic, salt and pepper for taste. So, who do we have to thank for helping create shepherd's pie?
That's a very good question. My nomination, Christopher Columbus.
Wait, wasn't he Italian?
He was, but interestingly enough, it was the Spanish that sent him to his now famous voyage to the New World. Initially, that expedition was to find a shortcut to India via the Western Sea Route, but what he ended up stumbling upon was this massive land that we now know as the Americas. Mm-hmm. And when he got there, not only did he find new civilizations, he also found new foods that we now consider as kind of daily, not very special, very normal, typical foods. Mm-hmm. And among those foods that he found included potatoes, corn, and tomatoes, all of which are important ingredients in shepherd's pie. And after he found these foods, he obviously brought these back to Europe, and thereafter set up a trade network between the Americas and the Europe, and affectionately called it the Columbian Exchange. And that exchange facilitated a lot of these New World foods to be incorporated into the European cuisines and to add to their cultural matrices. That's something that's been highlighted by an author called Alfred W. Crosby, who extensively illustrated this relationship in his book.
But we must not forget that the Spanish did help find that infamous chili pepper, right?
That is true.
And from there, the Spanish brought back these New World ingredients from the Americas, brought it to Europe. They used it in their own culinary experiences. And from there, during the 15th century, during the Age of Discovery, they, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spanish, they set on another trade route, led by the Portuguese, to go around Africa to find Southeast Asia. And from there on out, we seriously have to thank the Portuguese first for bringing in that chili into India. Otherwise, Indian cuisine is not the same. But from there, that created the Indian Ocean trade, which brought about the influence of European culture, heritage, and cuisine into Southeast Asia. And this is highlighted by, do you remember Lizzie calling him, the writer of Curry, A Tale of Cooks and Conquerors? We need to remember that no Indian had ever seen a chili before the Portuguese got there.
That's very interesting.
I mean, we could also say that the reverse happened, where Asia has also influenced the European food scene. And it can be seen through the advancement of Worcestershire sauce, ketchup, which all have its roots in Asia.
And they're very important ingredients to our shepherd's pie. And so clearly, just from listening to this brief discussion, it's quite clear that although the shepherd's pie ingredient list is quite short and not very sophisticated, the history behind it is fairly sophisticated. So first things first, obviously you have to wash the vegetables before you prepare them.
Next, start peeling your potatoes and have a pot of boiling water ready to go. After peeling the potatoes, chop them into small pieces so they can aid the cooking process. Please remember, these potatoes will be turned into mash.
So you are a potato expert.
I do love my potatoes. Potato, potato, potato. It was actually found in modern-day southern Peru, near Bolivia, by the Spanish, when the Spanish, with Christopher Columbus, discovered South America. And archaeologists did find that potato remains actually date back to 500 BC.
Wow.
That was during when the Incas actually grew them, the indigenous Southern Americans. They grew them, they ate them, they worshipped them. And interestingly enough, ancient Incan potatoes were actually had dark purple skin and yellow flesh. Does it remind you of something?
That sounds like sweet potato and yam.
Those were good.
Yeah.
Anyways, potatoes are actually a really climate crop. They can pretty much grow anywhere, given two conditions. They get a little water, about an inch to 2 inches a week, which is pretty simple actually. And the most important thing is definitely a temperate soil bed, which is tempered between 20 degrees Celsius and 24 degrees Celsius. Other than that, these two things, you got potatoes everywhere. So you can actually see that potato can be grown as a summer crop and a winter crop, depending where you are in the world. The Spanish army actually used it as a staple when Christopher Columbus and the Spanish Armada first arrived in South America. So as you've mentioned before, the potatoes were brought back to Europe by the Spanish via the Columbian Exchange. And since there, after the union of Portugal and Spain, known as the Iberian Union in 1580, the potatoes spread like wildfire, like they were growing everywhere. And afterwards, it got cultivated everywhere. That potato, which was originally grown in South America, now grown in Spain, did go through a change of some sorts. It didn't remain yellow fleshed or purple skin. This became known as the Irish potato that we're so associated today. And this potato didn't actually get into Ireland until 1580 by a man named Sir Walter Raleigh, a British explorer and historian, known for his expeditions in America. And he was the first one to bring and grow the first Irish potato that we know today.
Well, that's fascinating history of potato just from New World to Europe. But it didn't stop in Europe, did it? So how did it get to the other side of the world, namely Asia? Well, we point again to our beloved colonialists.
Did it fly there?
Oh, no, it didn't. Unfortunately, they haven't invented the airplane then.
Oh, damn.
But it went by boat. It went by the trade route, as you mentioned earlier, the Indian Ocean trade, which went around Africa, around India, and then onwards to Southeast Asia. And because of that, potato was slowly introduced to Africa, to India, and the rest of Asia. And, by the 16th century, the Philippines was eating potatoes, right? By 17th century, the Chinese imperial family was enjoying this crop. And further on, in the 18th century, the Indians introduced potatoes into their cuisine. But the most interesting example I like to point out here is actually the Japanese. And this is an example that was discussed by our beloved writer, Alfred W. Crosby, who, in his book, The Columbian Exchange, talked about how the Japanese actually did not initially like the taste of potatoes. But it was until the famines and floods that has caused starvation to so many that they almost had to start eating potatoes because, like you said, it grows so easily. In such harsh weather, it continued to feed the Japanese population. And then it was because of that, the Japanese began to incorporate potatoes into their diets. And guess what potatoes they ate?
Yeah.
It's the Irish potatoes, which tells you just how influential the colonialists were in Asia. And so even though it's just a potato, the international influence of colonialism and Western imperialism is everywhere to be found in this crop, from its origins all the way to its international popularity nowadays. So the next thing to do after you have washed the carrots is to grate them. And make sure you use a fine grater so that you get small slices of carrots so that when you cook them, they'll dissipate into a puree very quickly and easily. After you have grated the carrots, the next step is to grate the onions. Like the carrots, make sure you grate the onions finely so they can cook easily later on. After the potatoes are cooked through, drain it and return the potatoes back to the pan, and using a fork or a potato masher, mash potato so that it is fine and silky smooth. While you're mashing potato, add a splash of milk to help texturize the mash. After you've added the milk to the mash, add 2 more eggs into the mix. That will help to colorize the potato when it goes into the oven.
Next, sear off the lamb. Make sure the pan is nice and hot. Transfer to another plate and done.
Now you move on to the vegetables. First, stir fry the onion. After the onion has been fried off, now add in the carrots and continue to fry.
Add the corn and peas to taste. Please note these have been already cooked.
Once the vegetables have been fried off, add back in the lamb that you have fried off before and mix thoroughly. Once the vegetable and the lamb has been mixed well, start adding the condiments, beginning with ketchup. You can feel free to add to taste, but make sure you add enough so that the entire dish is well seasoned. Next, add the Worcestershire sauce. Remember, this is a very important part of shepherd's pie, so ensure that you add sufficient amounts.
Heinz ketchup, so good! Homegrown American condiment.
Peekaboo! Do you know ketchup is not a Western creation? Loser!
What did she say?
Clearly Clarence has got it all wrong because ketchup, as Andrew F. Smith's article Pure Ketchup has illustrated, only originated from Asia. And it really was a development from the fish sauce that was so prevalent in Southeast Asia, and it's a liquid that was extracted from the fermentation of fish and salt, and it was widely seen in Thailand and Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia.
It's okay, I got something. Don't worry about it. I got this. Anyways, these countries actually make up the fish sauce zone. And fish sauce does actually have its benefits. It has vitamin A, vitamin C, which are all essential vitamins that we need in our daily lives. True. And the thing is, it does have distinct umami flavor, which is a Japanese loan word for a savory taste, as noted by distinguished professor Miranda Brown. It actually originated in Thailand as fish or shrimp paste, and is actually directly translated from the Amoy dialect, fish juice, or in Amoy, gitsa. It's actually brine of pickled fish, pickling, or from vinegar. It was actually a method by the Romans and Greeks used to create sauces, and for another reason to preserve their food for long voyages, and of course enhance their food's flavor. However, the use of sauces actually declined during the Middle Ages. Even the pickling liquor later on became a sauce in its own right. However, pickling wasn't even a European invention. It was Asian. Asian pride.
And right he is, because not only did fish sauce or the shrimp paste develop in Thailand, it was widespread in Southeast Asia, and all thanks to these trade networks put up by the Western colonialists and imperialists, because through these trade networks it facilitated the transfer of not only the sauces themselves but the ingredients of the sauces to all these countries in Southeast Asia. So even though fish sauce or shrimp paste developed in Thailand, we saw variations of it everywhere else, and that is thanks to the local adaptation by these different countries upon the introduction of these different ingredients from around the region. And this was something that was illustrated in a renowned author Colleen Sen's book, Curry, A Global History.
During the Age of Discovery, we have the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the Spanish coming into Southeast Asia and colonizing Southeast Asia. And fish sauce actually traveled from Asia into Europe, and many variations actually surfaced as a means of local adaptation, as you've just said. Originally, it was the Dutch who tried this umami fish sauce. However, as stocks of fish sauce got lower, they tried to make their own fish sauce. And in the 1800s, they had anchovy ketchup, herring ketchup, rum ketchup, mushroom ketchup, even peach ketchup. And the Europeans actually didn't like this umami flavor and actually watered it down, which is kind of sad.
Oh, well, that's really unfortunate. But, as we bring it back to the ketchup that you originally thought was from the US, it really wasn't until 1812 when a man by the name of James Mees invented what we now know as the tomato ketchup. And thereafter, the Americans love their sugar, right? So through local adaptation, they introduced a sweeter and sweeter recipe of ketchup. Ketchup is not the only sauce in our dish that has its origins from Asia. In fact, Worcestershire sauce, arguably one of the most important elements in a shepherd's pie, which lends itself that distinctive flavor, also hails from Asia. The story goes that in the 1830s, a man by the name of Lord Marcus Sandys, who was a former governor of Bengal in India, drove to Worcestershire in England to visit a company called Lees and Parents and told him to replicate a recipe that he found in India. And this recipe is an original recipe that he found when he was in India.
According to Lizzie Cullingham, author of Curry, A Tale of Cooks and Conquerors, she actually wrote that their first concoction actually didn't go so well. It was so fiery, it made their eyes water. And the chemists actually were so disgusted by the mixture, they left it in the barrel and left it. But upon spring cleaning, they noticed that an appetizing aroma was actually coming out of the abandoned barrels. And upon tasting it, discovered that the concoction actually matured and it was actually a pleasingly spicy taste. I think that's a stroke of luck.
Well, stroke of luck or not, Lees and Parents continue to be the major producer of Worcestershire sauce to this day. And I think this is a perfect example of a reversal in influence between the Western colonialists and imperialists and the Asian countries that were colonized by the Europeans. Next, add salt and pepper to taste. To ensure that the mixture doesn't dry out in the oven, you can add some water, but we have gone with beef stock here because it adds a little bit more flavor to the mixture. Once ready, pour the mixture into a casserole pot. Once you have poured the mixture in, next layer the potato mash on top in the casserole pot. Make sure you do so evenly so that in the oven it also cooks evenly. Finally, transfer the casserole pot into an oven that's heated at full whack. Cook for about 10 to 15 minutes until golden.
Shepherd's pie, done.
So this is our completed version of shepherd's pie.
And as you can see, the potato now is golden and crusty, which means that it has great texture to it as well. And so now we shall cut it up and feast. Now that we're done with shepherd's pie, you can clearly see that this is no simple dish. In fact, shepherd's pie exhibits significant layered influence.
It's actually a cultural imposition of sorts, where you can see the British colonizing India in the 19th century, or the imposition of Goa trying to spread Christianity in the 15th century during the Age of Discovery. When the British actually first started to settle in India with the East India Company in the 18th century, the British actually tried to first mimic their lives in their homeland. And because of this, they married local women, and local chefs became helpers in the British living quarters. But then, however, British in India were actually referred to as Anglo-Indians. And this actually built into a cultural matrix, as their mixed descendants also had the influence of European meat eating, drinking, and religion. However, Anglo-Indians actually developed their own sense of culture and is an example of hybridization. And also, we note that because of the imposition in India, it actually brought a lot of ingredients that were not together within India, together at one place.
And so really, all in all, after looking at shepherd's pie from a historical perspective, it actually is a very interesting dish because it shows us how the world's food are connected from the New World to Europe via the Columbia Exchange, and then Europe onwards to Asia through the Indian Ocean trade, and along the way under that complex era of European colonialism and imperialism. So, once you slice it up, this is what it looks like. A good layer of crusty mashed potato and some very soft meat filling in the bottom. Well, bon appetit.